In this video, I'll give you my opinion on the PreCons from Lorwyn Eclipsed. First up, we're going to talk about Aisling the Limitless. This is a 5-color deck, and as of the day of recording, you could purchase it on TCG Player for $30, but if you're going to get the singles, it would be about $64. That is excluding both Aisling the Limitless and Massive Mysteries, as neither of those cards is listed on TCG Player as of the day of recording. This deck is elemental tribal, and it focuses on having lots of enter the battlefield effects, which goes really good with our commander, and it can be super explosive. The reason why those enter the battlefield effects are really good with our commander is that she gets us essentially double the ETBs. Aisling has this ability that allows us to evoke elementals from our hand onto the battlefield. Evoke just means you're paying, in this case, generic 4 instead of whatever that card's converted mana cost is. Unfortunately, that card does get sacrificed, which is why we're having enter the battlefield effects. So you'll sacrifice those creatures, and then whenever you sacrifice a non-token elemental, you can create a token copy of it, and that token gains haste until end of turn. You do get to keep that token if you can pay Wooburg at the end of turn, otherwise it gets sacrificed. In playing games against this deck, I only ever saw a player once keep a token via that route, so not going to happen very often, but you are getting double of the enter the battlefield effects, which can be really powerful. And then we'll also have some ways to get some of those cards back. Next, we'll talk about some of the cards that I like in the early, mid, and late game, and then how we're going to interact with our opponent. So early game, we're hoping to get out cards like Cream of the Crop or Realm Walker, which really help us fix our draws. Cream of the Crop allows us to look at the top X cards of our library, where X is the creature's power when it enters. So you'll get to do this twice if you got Aisling out and you've evoked it, really helping you to fix the top of your library and draw into the cards you need. Realm Walker just allows us to play elementals off the top of our library, and then obviously we want to get Aisling out, as that's our primary driver and helps us to get out in front of our opponents. In the mid game, we're looking for cards like Descendant's Fury, Omnath Locus of the Royal, or Cavalier of Thorns. Descendant's Fury was surprisingly powerful. I've played several games where the Aisling player would have this out, there'd be somebody open, and they'd get to attack that player and kind of snowball into more and more effects as they'd sacrifice those elementals and then get other elementals with enter the battlefield effects, and then have sometimes ways of getting those cards back. Omnath's just going to help you kind of control the board and draw cards. Omnath has this landfall ability that allows you to put +1 counters on your creatures, and then if you got 8 or more lands, you can draw cards. And then when Omnath enters, you get to deal damage equal to the number of elementals you control to any target. Cavalier of Thorns is really a good one to evoke, as this is a 5-color deck and this card has 3 green pips, and it's going to help you get into more lands, which really accelerates your game plan. I've never saw this card miss, although it does have potential to whiff, but you'll most likely get to put a land card from the top 5 of your library onto the battlefield. And then it's a great blocker, allows you to kind of set up in that it's a 5/6 with reach, and then players don't really want to kill it, because when they do, you can exile it and then get any card you want from your graveyard and put it on top of your library. In the late game, we have a couple cards in Belonging and Vernal Sovereign, which really help us get out a lot of tokens onto the battlefield, token creatures. Vernal Sovereign is going to come with a XX creature, where X is equal to the number of creatures you control, so kind of scales with how many creatures you've got on the battlefield. And then every time the elemental elk attacks, you can get another one of those. Belonging is going to give you 3 1/1 shapeshifters, so they're essentially elementals. In this case, we do have a couple lords in the deck which help pump up your elementals, so that's important. But more importantly, it comes with Encore, so you can bring it back for its Encore cost, and you get one of these for each opponent you control, so you can really get a ton of shapeshifters. And then the most common way that I ended up actually seeing Aisling win games was through Jubilation, where you'd either evoke Jubilation out, giving your board +4/+4 and trample, or Encore it, and then you get a bunch of Jubilations. So they'd be, 7/7, 9/9, and then 11/11s, and then give everything on the battlefield, +6/+6 and trample. So Belonging plus Jubilation really allowed Aisling to overrun the entire board in one go. Ways that we're going to interfere with our opponent's game plan. Muldrotha isn't specifically interference, but getting her on the battlefield allows us to get all those elementals back, so you can kind of pick and choose out of your graveyard what's going to help you. Omnath, Locus of Rage, allows us to deal 3 damage to any target anytime one of our elementals dies, so it can really help us get rid of our opponent's utility type creatures. And then Shatter the Sky is a board wipe that allows each player to draw a card as long as they controlled a creature with power 4 or greater. Not hard for us to do, and wasn't uncommon for 1 or 2 other players at the table to not get a card out of this. So in my local game store's most recent PDH/PreCon tournament, Ashling the Limitless, the best any player did running Ashling was go 2-2. Not enough to make the semifinals, so I'm going to give this deck a C. So did better than average in that particular meta. Played pretty well out of the box and had quite a bit of explosivity to it. And that'll put us, here on our overall list of precons, right about mid-tier, so decent deck. Next up, we'll talk about the Anti-Ool Curse Wretch deck. As of the day of recording, you could buy this deck on TCG Player for $31. If you wanted to buy it in terms of singles, it was $59. And just like the last one, both Anti-Ool as well as the Reaper King No More secondary commander, neither of those were options to purchase, so the deck would technically cost more than that $59. This is a -1/-1 counters deck, very much in the theme of Jundam Out, which if you're familiar with is really an attrition type game. And this was a very resistive but slow deck, and a lot of times in games this deck would kind of be the arch enemy because it does so much in removing your opponent's stuff. Anti-Ool is a 4/4 for 4 mana that comes with Ward, Blight 2, which just means your opponents can't target her unless they put 2 -1 counters on a creature they control. And then whenever a -1 counter is put onto a creature, you get to draw a card as long as you control that creature, and if you don't, its controller loses 1 life. So it allows us to draw cards and also drain our opponents out. In the early game, we really like cards like Glissa the Sunslayer, Necroskitter, and Evolution Sage. Glissa is just kind of a catch-all. She helps you draw cards, she can remove counters, and she can destroy enchantments. She's also a first striking Death Toucher, so players can't really block her without losing something. Necroskitter is a 1/4 with Wither, so it's going to deal damage in -1/-1 counters. And then more importantly, whenever a creature with a -1 counter on it dies, we can return it to our battlefield under our control. So this is going to allow us, this really becomes a target for your opponents, as if they don't remove it, you're going to start accumulating more and more creatures. And then Evolution Sage is just great because it's got that proliferate ability on landfall. So if you've got -1 counters on your opponent's stuff, you're going to be playing lands. You're just going to slowly be making their board smaller and smaller. In the mid game, obviously we want to get out Anti-Ool, as that allows us to draw cards and accelerate our game plan. And then another fun card, I don't really know that I would keep it in the deck if I was going to upgrade it, but I did see Tree of Perdition do some funky stuff when playing against this deck. Exchanging life totals, taking the player with the most life from 38 down to 1, in that they gave the Tree of Perdition a bunch of -1 counters themselves. And then Scorpion God, just a very good card. Draws you more cards whenever creatures with -1 counters die. Allows you to have a mana sink in that you can just pay 3 mana to put -1 counters on stuff. And then it's hard to get rid of because when it dies, it just ends up going back to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So players really have to exile it. And then in the late game, Midnight Banshee, if you are not playing black, is super painful as your entire board's going to get -1 counters. Carnifex Demon gives another way for you to give -1 counters to your opponent's creatures. It does hit your own stuff, but you don't really mind most of the time because you can get advantages out of it. And then Shamil the Inner Sun, really a card that I thought would not be as good, but seeing as we have so many control pieces, and then I also think the metas that I play in don't run enough artifact removal, so this ended up being able to sit on the table and just generate value for the Anti-Ool player. Ways that we're going to interfere with our opponent's game plan. Contagion Clasp, another great card because of the Proliferate ability. Yes, it does put a -1 counter on one of your opponent's creatures things, but really to be able to pay 4 and just tap it to proliferate once per turn, great. If you get any way to untap it, then you can get multiple uses out of it. Black Sun Zenith, a semi-board wipe in that you can pay X to put -1 counters where it's equal to X on each creature, and then it shuffles back into your library. And then another card that surprised me that always seemed to do really well was Incremental Blight, as it was almost always removing 3 creatures in one card. Yes, it was usually hitting utility creatures, but sometimes the anti-Ul player is getting extra draws out of it. So how did this deck do in the same tournament? It also went 2-2, although it did do a little bit worse than our other best Jund deck. So it lines up the same. As you can see there in the middle of that C column, Korvold the Fey Cursed King did slightly better than Anti-Ul. It was also 2-2, but based on opponents' win percentage as well as what opponents faced each other. I don't really know the program that the game store owner uses to rank players, but you get 4 rounds of Swiss before they move on to semifinals, and Korvold was ranked ahead of Anti-Ul, even though they were both 2-2. I did want to note the Sisay player. There was a Sisay player, which has historically been our best 5-color PreCon deck. Came out in 2023, I believe, and just like with the Korvold Fey Cursed King deck, the Sisay player actually ended up ranking, even though it was 2-2, slightly below Ashling. So Ashling becomes our new best rainbow deck. And then there were some players running the secondary commanders in this tournament. None of the Massive Mystery players were able to win any games, and there was one Reaper King No More player that was able to get 1 win, but both of the preset commanders that these decks come with ended up performing better than their secondary commander options. If you like having a really explosive deck that can snowball really fast, Ashling is probably one that you'll enjoy. And then if you really like being able to control the game and kind of being the arch enemy, then Anti-Ul might be your style. Anti-Ul is definitely more up my alley, and I need to probably inch away from that, as people tend to find it not as fun. If you found this video helpful, please leave it a like. Consider subscribing if you don't want to miss any more new content from Budget Commander. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.